how do we think before we have words? Cognitive theorists usually fall into two camps. They treat the relationship between abstract thought and language as completely independent systems, or they argue they are exactly the same thing. But experience contradicts both ideas. We frequently hold a clear, complex thought, a dense cloud of meaning, before formal language takes over to express it. The Brain Kinematics Model, or BKM, offers a structural alternative to this paradox. It views mental activity not as abstract magic, but as a physical, mechanical process of organization. This text cascade maps the ultimate architectural progression of the BKM. Matter reacts, life retains, mind organizes, consciousness resonates, and finally, language stabilizes. Look at the final link in that chain. Language acts as the specific stabilization mechanism for all preceding mental organization. This structural view eliminates the traditional debate. We do not need to choose between isolation and strict identity. Instead, mind and language are parallel organizational systems. Language is a state-dependent manifestation of the mind. The coupling strength between your underlying thoughts and your verbal capacity physically fluctuates, governed by the dynamic state of your brain at any given moment. To see how this works, we will map the hierarchy of mentation, from a raw, wordless theme all the way down to formal language, to demonstrate exactly how this process is physically gated. Language operates as a strictly state-dependent physical manifestation of the brain's regulatory continuum. In the BKM framework, raw sensory and emotional inputs leave behind what we call residual strains. These are the unrefined, abstract data points entering your cognitive system. Mentation, what we usually label as thinking, is the progressive physical coagulation of these residual strains into tighter, more rigid structures. This chart maps the vertical hierarchy those strains must travel through. The continuum layers drop from theme to symbol, sign, language, and concept. The small data points entering the top represent residual strains. At the top layer, residual strains interact loosely. Mentation here is organized by broad, unrefined themes. As the data points drop down into the symbol layer, they cluster into denser nodes. Themes gain specific representations, but they remain strictly nonverbal. Dropping further into the sign layer, symbolic meanings align into structured grids, rigidly associated with specific indicators. Reaching the bottom layers, grids condense into solid geometric blocks. This is where mentation solidifies into language and concepts. This progression is strictly hierarchical. The cognitive system cannot jump from a raw theme directly to language without passing through every intermediate stage of coagulation. You experience this mechanical limit directly whenever you say, "I know what I mean, but I can't express it yet." The thematic organization exists in your brain. You feel the thought, but the required linguistic coagulation has not yet physically occurred. The depth a residual strain reaches along this hierarchy is not a conscious choice. It is a mechanical limitation dictated entirely by the current state of your continuum. Let's look back at the vertical cascade, now with a slider added to track the dynamic state of the regulatory continuum. Different states of consciousness act as physical gates regulating downward flow. We begin at the lowest setting, deep sleep. Here, minimal mentation occurs. A physical barrier closes right below the theme layer, preventing residual strains from flowing any deeper. Moving the slider up to ordinary dreaming changes the mechanics. The flow penetrates deeper, but arrests immediately after the symbol layer. Residual strains pull heavily in theme and symbol, blocked from reaching language. Because the flow stops at symbols, prefrontal participation dims. The dream narrative builds automatically, relying on imagery and emotion without requiring formal words. This mechanical constraint mirrors the process of scientific discovery. Breakthroughs often arrest at the symbol layer, appearing as abstract patterns or spatial intuitions, before the brain achieves the stability needed to coagulate those patterns into formal equations. Now watch what happens when we move the slider to its maximum limit, focused waking. The barrier disappears. Thick arrows push the data straight down through sign, language, and concept. Focused waking forces maximum integration, compressing raw data into highly stable, advanced linguistic organization. Language accessibility is physically gated. If the brain's dynamic state is too relaxed, linguistic stabilization is mechanically impossible. But there is a documented anomaly that stress tests this entire model: lucid dreaming. It occurs when a dreamer, completely immersed in a blurry narrative, realizes they are dreaming, snapping directly into sharp, hyper-focused clarity. A common misconception assumes lucid dreaming is simply more dreaming, powered by stronger residual strains. The kinematics suggest otherwise. It is a unique, hybrid organizational state. This comparative chart illustrates the dynamic competition model. On the left, we have the dream streamline, theme to symbol to narrative. On the right, the waking streamline, language, reality testing, and self-monitoring. During a lucid dream, the brain's order parameter violently oscillates between these two conflicting states. It stabilizes in the center, drawing lines to connect elements from both columns simultaneously. This is the principle of multi-level coagulation. The symbolic dream streamlines do not vanish. They coexist and compete directly with self-aware waking streamlines. This deeper organizational layer successfully recruits autobiographical memory and active self-monitoring without fully waking up the continuum. Lucid dreaming proves the robustness of the model. It is a temporary, oscillating boundary state balancing exactly between symbolic expansion and linguistic stabilization. This raises a final mechanical question. If lucid dreaming represents this complex multi-level state, why is it notoriously brief and unstable? Returning to the dual streamline diagram, we see the order parameter node beginning to drift heavily. Because the system balances on a fragile transitional boundary, any minor shift forces it to collapse entirely into the dream attractor or the waking attractor. Just like any physical system, a highly complex, unstable state eventually fractures, collapsing into one of two simpler, stable forms. Zooming out from the lucid dreaming anomaly, this rule applies to human cognition as a whole. Language does not sit outside of mind as a separate observer. Looking at the complete cascade from theme down to concept, the hierarchy is clear. Language is the final stabilization layer of a complex, multi-tiered residual strain architecture. By viewing consciousness as a fluid gradient of coagulation, we track the physical mechanics governing how a wordless intuition stabilizes into a concrete idea.